The dollar is in decline and not even gold can save it. And we know the dollarization is accelerating fast and lots of big moves happened over just the last 2 weeks. We had Russia committing to using the yuan as an international currency for their global trade, and France just sold a huge LNG cargo outside of the US dollar. And these are just two examples of the world de-dollarizing. And obviously, the United States, they have done a lot of damage to the dollar's reputation. Sanctioning away Russian assets was a crazy move, 100%. But a more egregious sin is the Federal Reserve constantly printing tons of money, debasing the value of the dollar. And this is how bad things are. The purchasing power of a dollar in 2022 was about 92.6% of the purchasing power of a 2021 dollar. And let me repeat that. In just 1 year, the dollar has lost 7.4% of purchasing power. And over the last 100 years, the dollar has lost almost 97% of its original value. And this is one of the core reasons why countries are de-dollarizing. They don't trust the Federal Reserve or the US government to act responsibly anymore. When another crisis comes, the whole world knows that the Fed is going to print its way out of a recession. Powell is going to fire up the printing press and inflate the money supply once again to save the US economy. And because the majority of central bank reserves are in dollars, it leeches away the value of their holdings. The world's reserves effectively gets debased to solve America's economic problems, and no one signed up for that. Now, there's a lot of talk about a great reset where the United States could use gold to back up the dollar once again to restore trust. We even have Texas lawmakers proposing a gold-backed digital currency. They are trying to revive the idea of sound money that can't be devalued. But I have bad news. The Bretton Woods system is not going to come back. The good old days of the dollar being pegged to the price of gold is impossible to return to. And you quickly see how the dollar system have morphed into a beast that is on a runaway train to inflation hell. Now it seems like it makes sense that the US can get a return to a gold standard is possible. Now the US reportedly has the world's largest gold reserves, sitting at 8,100 tons, more than Germany, France and Russia combined. And for argument's sake, let's just assume that Fort Knox still has all the gold there. There hasn't been an external audit for decades, and even to today, America still doesn't allow full transparency of their reserves. But even if all the gold is present, there's still a big problem. America has too many dollars relative to their physical gold. There are too many Federal Reserve notes floating around in the ether and too few ounces in the vault. And if we look at M0, which is the monetary base, and this is the cash in the hands of the public and bank deposits in central bank reserves, we have a crazy figure of $5.3 trillion. And realize that this is base money. This is a generous number that removes money locked away in money markets, savings accounts, and within the big banks as well. And looking at the official gold reserves in the US Treasury, we have around 261 million ounces of physical gold. That's how many bars and coins the Treasury holds. So if we take the $5.3 trillion of base money and we divide it by 261 million ounces of gold, we get a price of over $20,000 an ounce. And that means if the United States wants to back up the US dollar with gold, they will have to revalue the price of gold above 20 grand. This also means that the dollar is now effectively devalued versus gold. And before the reset, you needed just $2,000 to buy 1 ounce of gold, but now you need 20 grand after the reset to buy the same physical ounce. And this is where all hell breaks loose and why America cannot afford to return to the gold standard. So in this chart, we have 3 types of assets that are equivalent in value to each other. We have $400,000 in cash, 200 ounces of gold, and a medium family home in the United States. Now, all these 3 assets are worth $400,000. The cash, the gold, and the house, they are all worth 400 grand each. And if we go back to a gold standard, suddenly this equation will change. The 200 gold coins are no longer worth 400 grand, but $4 million. Remember that 1 ounce of gold is now 20 grand. And because a family home is equivalent to 200 gold coins, that means it should also be worth $4 million. Homeowners will start to jack up their selling price. They won't just accept $400,000 for their homes in devalued dollars. They want either the same 200 ounces of gold or $4 million in cash. And do you see the big problem here? When you revalue the price of gold, you also have to revalue the prices of other hard assets. Since the dollar is now as good as gold, That means gold is now officially money. It is the new baseline where everything is compared against. And this is enough to cause hyperinflation in the United States, where everything gets repriced. And this also means that the dollars in your savings accounts are worth less and they have lost even more purchasing power. If you didn't hold gold or other hard assets, your wealth will be wiped out, and savers of US dollars both at home and abroad will have their holdings instantly devalued. The bond markets will implode, and holders of US dollars, they'll all rush to get rid of them for hard assets while there's still time. There'll be panic and chaos on the streets. Now you're probably thinking, Sean, the solution is so simple. I would just buy as much gold as possible and then back the dollar with it at the end of the day. But just imagine a situation where the United States decides to go into the markets, they go into the open market and stockpile more gold. It will send alarm bells ringing across the whole world. It will raise more red flags than a Chinese Communist parade. The US will be waving a big red flag, telling the world that gold is real money. Gold is so valuable that even the United States, the issuer of the reserve currency itself, is dumping the US dollar for the precious metal. That is insane. This will trigger a wave of buying that the world has never seen before. Now, 2022 was a record year of gold buying. Gold demand went above 4,700 tons. That's an 11-year high. But this number will easily triple if the United States suddenly decides to increase their gold reserves. Central banks all over the world, not only China, they will start dumping their dollar assets and rush for gold like never before. Confidence in the dollar will collapse. We will see gold buying happen month after month in the hundreds or even thousands of tons because the dollar is now a hot potato. Individual investors like you and me will also rush for gold. And this will cause all the smaller bars and coins to sell out. The physical premiums will go through the roof. And here's the situation. America will not be able to stack gold at cheap prices for another gold standard. Gold might start at $2,000 an ounce, but by the time the buying is done, the price of gold might reach 5,000 or even 10 grand and beyond. And let's just assume that the US manages to double or triple their stockpile, it still wouldn't work. Now, governments and central banks around the world will all begin to test the gold standard. They will start redeeming their dollars for physical gold, and this will break the system because they don't trust the US to have the gold they claim to back up every single dollar in existence. Now, back in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, they required a minimum ratio of gold reserves to currency and deposits of around 40%. But in reality, the gold reserves went down to as low as 10%. It was never 100%. There was never a full gold standard before. And this is essentially another form of fractional reserve banking, but this time using gold. And just recall the recent SVB crisis. Depositors all rushed to get their money out to the point that the bank collapsed. And the same thing is going to happen to the Federal Reserve, which will break the gold window. And when it breaks, the US government, they will take draconian steps to fight back against all these gold redemptions like before. They could move to confiscate private gold from US citizens like what Roosevelt did in 1933. Gold bullion and gold coins all had to be surrendered to the Federal Reserve. But it's more likely that a repeat of 1971 will happen, and that's when Nixon broke the gold standard. He stopped all redemptions of paper dollars for gold and effectively ended the entire system. And either way, this will destroy the last shred of credibility left in the Federal Reserve. The fiat system is just so monstrous that it is impossible to go back to a gold standard. It is impossible to back up every dollar with gold at a reasonable price. But let's go deeper. Those are just the technical reasons why the US can't return to a gold standard. The real reason is that Asia will suddenly gain all the power. Now, America's greatest rival. But let's go deeper. Those are just the technical reasons why the US can't return to a gold standard. The real reason is that Asia will suddenly gain all the power. Now, America's greatest rivals, China and Russia, will suddenly hold all the wealth. And this isn't some conspiracy talk. The Federal Reserve themselves have admitted why they don't want to return to a gold standard. On the Fed's own website, they have listed some really silly reasons for not going back to a gold-backed currency, and this includes some really bizarre ones like how gold is environmentally damaging to mine. But this is the real answer we are all looking for. They admitted the US mines a lot of gold, but we are not the biggest producer. The bigger suppliers of gold would have more control over our monetary policy. And guess what? China and Russia, they are the biggest producers of gold. China's at number 1, mining 332 tons a year, while Russia produces 330 tons annually. Plus, their reserves are most definitely understated because they likely want to accumulate more gold without pushing the global price up. And if the US goes back to a gold standard, and if it turns out that Russia and China have more gold, they are effectively a new financial superpower. America would have effectively given up the reserve status to China and Russia, because now there's much fewer yuan or rubles circulating around compared to the dollar. It's easier to back up their local currencies with gold, and this ironically will dethrone the dollar as the world reserve currency, and America doesn't want to lose control of the reserve currency, even if that means the dollar losing purchasing power. And even households in India have more gold than the US Treasury. According to the World Gold Council, Indian families hold more than 1.5 trillion in physical gold, and that is over 23,000 tons of gold, 3 times more than the stash sitting in Fort Knox. In fact, there are estimates that it could be as high as 27,000 tons. The man on the street in India has more gold than Uncle Sam. And if America decides to go back on the gold standard, they will lose control of the dollar's value, and it will be based on free market economics. It will be determined by the supply and demand of gold, not dollars. However, here's the biggest reason why a gold standard is never coming back, because it constrains the US government from spending excessively. And under a gold standard, you can only issue as much currency as you increase your gold supply, your gold reserves. And in 2022, the total supply of gold mined increased by only 2%. Do you think the US Treasury can keep up the money supply growth cap at 2%? It's virtually impossible. America's default strategy is to print money and expand the monetary base, especially when there is a crisis. And here are some very disturbing numbers that we need to digest. In 2020, the money supply grew by a historic 27% after the Federal Reserve printed trillions and gave out all those stimmy checks. And that's why even though a gold-backed currency might be good for our purchasing power, it will just collapse the US economy in the process. And that's why the dollar's decline can't be stopped. Inflation is baked into the cake, guys, and the return to a gold standard is almost impossible. Plus, with all the sanctions in Russia, the world will be suspicious of the US if a return to the gold standard really happens, right? There'll be two big questions floating around. Does the US possess the gold that they claim to have? And even if they do, will they confiscate my dollars away as well? But the biggest loss the US will have is control over the world monetary system. Because if we stay in the current dollar system, even though it is dying, America still has enormous control over the supply of the reserve currency. And let's use the Federal Reserve's dollar swap lines as an example. Sure, they are designed to improve liquidity around the world, but it's more about exerting control over the world. There's a big difference. And we know there's always a consistent demand for dollars. You needed to buy commodities and to pay your dollar-denominated debt. And if you're in America's good graces, you'll be rewarded with a US dollar swap line. And this is basically a lifeline where countries can access US dollar liquidity when they need it the most. And the Federal Reserve has swap lines with countries that they deem are friendly, like Canada, the UK, and the EU. They have an unlimited swap line with the United States. But notice that many countries in the global south don't have swap lines with the Fed. Obviously, Russia isn't on the list, but China and India are missing too. And this is how the US exerts control using the dollar. If there's a currency crisis and you don't have a swap line with the US, your local currency is at risk of depreciation and inflation will soar. So we shouldn't hold our breath for the US to return to a gold standard. It could happen, but it's really unlikely. America won't want to give up control, and we continue to see the world de-dollarize more and more as a result. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't hold gold. In fact, this tells us that inflation will forever be a clear and present danger. The decline of the dollar is inevitable and we must prepare. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Is the US dollar truly doomed? Is the return to the gold standard even possible today? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these inflationary times.